Thanks very much. So my name is Clare Demerse. I'm the Acting Director of the Climate Change Program at the Pembina Institute, which is a sustainable energy think tank. And I'm here today to talk about financial support for climate action in developing countries, which is an issue that can sometimes be overlooked when environmental groups talk about all the domestic concerns that we also have concerning climate change. But this is in fact an obligation that's existed for a very long time. Rich countries accepted this obligation when the UN Climate Convention was first negotiated. It was reaffirmed in a more specific way in 2009 in Copenhagen and last year in Cancun. Poorer countries need this support to adapt to the impacts of climate change. For example, it could support malaria nets in new regions as the disease spreads. Developed countries promised in 2009 to provide $10 billion a year for the next 3 years in Fast Start financing. The funding was supposed to be new, additional, and balanced between adaptation and emission reduction goals. Last year, Canada announced a 2010 contribution of $400 million. The government explained this was Canada's fair share, since Canada traditionally provides about 4% of total funding for global efforts. From our perspective, $400 million could well be Canada's fair share if it were delivered effectively. Unfortunately, there were some sizable problems with the government's 2010 approach. It turned out to be not quite as originally advertised. First of all, just 11% of the total was dedicated to adaptation efforts. For the world's poorest people, adaptation to the impacts of climate change that they're already feeling is the overwhelming priority. We don't necessarily believe that balanced has to mean a 50-50 split, but 11% comes up short against anyone's definition of balanced. Secondly, 72% of Canada's total financing was in the form of loans to the World Bank's private sector lending arm. We would agree there's some role for loans in clean energy development, but there's also a huge need for grant funding to get the right kinds of policies in place and to build capacity in lower income countries. For these reasons, we would like to see the overwhelming majority of Canada's financing provided as grants, not loans. If Canada does continue to use loans in 2011 and beyond, we need more transparency about those loans. We need to be able to understand what fraction of them are what they would be equivalent to as grants, and how the government is defining clean energy, which can be quite a broad category and mean very different things to different people. Then there are the essential questions of new and additional. In 2010, some of Canada's financing contribution came from the government's increase to the aid budget. But that increase fulfilled the commitment the government made in 2002, so it's a stretch to call it new money. In 2011 and 2012, Canada should provide its climate financing contributions from truly new funds, funds outside of the total existing budgetary commitments to official development assistance. That's because fighting climate change hasn't made fighting poverty or investing in health and education any less important or any easier. So we need both a growing ODA budget and new climate financing contributions. Of course, these questions of additionality have only become more important because of the government's decision to freeze aid spending. There are many ways to raise truly additional funding, often while reducing greenhouse gas pollution. So my colleagues have pointed out, budgets are one of the most important ways that we can understand a government's priorities. Providing Canada's fair share of climate financing in a transparent and an effective way would help to build trust at the international negotiations, show some much-needed leadership from Canada in tackling climate change on the world stage. On the other hand, failing to provide Canada's fair share would send the opposite message. It would not be well received by developing countries at the negotiating table or by groups like ours here at home. Financing is going to be a huge part of the international negotiations this year on climate change. If Canada wants to avoid some of the criticism it has faced in recent years on the world stage, this is an area where we can really make a difference. So we'll be watching carefully on Tuesday to see whether Canada lives up to its commitment in this federal budget. That means providing the grant equivalent of $400 million for 2011 and the same for 2012, making sure the funding is new and additional so that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul, increasing the share of that funding dedicated to adaptation, increasing the share of grants, being transparent about any loans the government does provide, and making sure that poor communities have a real say in how the funds are spent. Some funds do this much better than others, and we would like to see Canada support leading approaches, like the UN's Adaptation Fund. Thank you very much. Merci.
Well, thanks so very much. Canadians are concerned about the economy, and rightly so. But they also want effective action to deal with global poverty and with climate change and to promote peace. The coming budget is one that risks being out of step with Canadian values and the vision that they have of Canada's role in the world. A budget in sync with Canadians would make a 10-year commitment to grow aid to the 0.7% internationally accepted aid target. It would reallocate military spending, including F-35 jet spending, towards this compelling aid goal, and to make a genuinely additional increase in climate financing after 2012. If there are any questions, we'd be happy to take them. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.